My name is Ana Buchain. I'm the Vice President for B3, the Brazilian Stock Exchange. Actually, we are much more than a stock exchange, but I'll get to that later. And today, I have the pleasure to have here with me Morgan Housel. So Morgan, it's amazing to have you here talking to our public and our audience. They are willing to hear you talk about investment, how we spend money, and the psychology of money, of course. So thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. It's my third time in Sao Paulo. I always love visiting, so thank you.
Really? Do you like São Paulo? How do you think about São Paulo? What do
I
you
love
think?
it. It reminds me of the New York of Brazil. That's what I think it is. You know, we're not like San Francisco, not like Seattle, but like New York. It's a business city.
As cool as San Francisco, right?
Better weather than almost anywhere in the U.S. That's true. Yes.
It is true, but I have to tell you, I love the U.S. and I love going there and learning from you. So
Great. Thank you.
It's great having you here. So I'm gonna hit right away, Maureen. So I heard that you say that you have like a happy childhood without luxuries or unnecessary spending. What was like growing up in that kind of environment, and what was your relationship with money as a child?
I had a very good childhood. My father was a doctor. My mom was a nurse, but they were very frugal. They didn't spend a lot of money. And we lived in a town that was not very wealthy. A lot of poor people in the city that I grew up in. And so I think my expectations were pretty low, both because my parents didn't spend a lot of money and my town there's nobody rich in my town. And so growing up, you know, we had everything that we needed and some of what we wanted. And I actually think that was a great way to raise kids. I think my parents did a pretty good job on this. If you have everything that you want, you don't appreciate anything that you have. And so it was a pretty healthy relationship with money. And I didn't really know that there were wealthy people in the world until I was a teenager, 18 or 19 years old. I didn't really know that they existed like they did. I had never seen a Ferrari. I'd never seen a big fancy house before. And then so when I saw that, it was like, oh, there's this realization, there's another world out there of money. And at the time, I'm very different now, but at the time it was like, I want to be that guy. I want to be the guy with the Lamborghini in the big house. That's not me anymore. But when I was 19, that was kind of my first, big influence with money was like, those people have a lot. They live this incredible life, and I want that. I think a lot of the young people in particularly go through this when they are becoming teenagers and young adults trying to make a name for themselves. They have some sort of inspiration that they see and they shoot straight to the top. And because they don't have a lot of job skills, personality, humor, intelligence, wisdom, they want to gain their attention in the world with their car, their house, their jewelry. That's kind of where it goes. So that was definitely me when I was a kid.
Perfect. Actually, you brought 2 points that I would like to tackle with you today. The first of all, we have to value the things that we get. So you often mention in your podcast that we have to work for that. Otherwise, it won't mean a thing.
Yeah.
And the second idea that you often propose is that everything that you're going to get, sometimes just filling a gap, and it's not going to make you happy. Would you mind talking a little bit about those 2 ideas?
Well, I think money can definitely make you happier. Spending money can make you happier. I'm not one of these people who says, don't even bother, live frugally. That's not how I think. I think spending money can be a great thing. I do think, though, that for a lot of people, they are trying to fill a hole in their personality. They are unhappy with their careers. They're unhappy with themselves. They might be unhappy with some of their relationships. And it's very easy to assume that, if I had more money and if I spent more money, those problems would go away. And I think that can be a danger for a lot of people. It is very common and very easy that if you wake up and you are unhappy with your life, that you say, if only I had more money, I would be happier. It's such a tangible thing, and it's such an easy thing to want to chase. And sometimes it might be true. Money can solve a lot of problems and make things more comfortable. But for a lot of people, they are trying to fill a hole that cannot be filled with money. And therefore, I think you have a lot of very wealthy people all over the world who are still not very happy in life because they've been telling themselves their entire life, if only I had more money, I would be happier. And then they get more money and they have just as many problems in their relationships, in their careers, in their health. Those problems didn't go away. And then they become really depressed when they realize that there actually is like no hope. They have all the money they could ever need, and they're still unhappy with life. And that's a hard realization for them.
Yes, it is. It is definitely it is. And I truly agree with you that money can sometimes buy you the freedom to be. There's one book that has been written by Edouard Louis, which is a writer, a French writer, who's like very hype right now. And he has written a book called Monique is Free, is Set Free. And it talks about a woman who finally can get out of a poor marriage because of the money. So I agree with you.
Yeah.
You have to have money to actually have some kind of power over your life, but it does not mean everything.
Yeah.
So-
I think money can help you live a better life and a happier life. But if you were to name the things that make a happier life, it would be independence, freedom, relationships, health, those kind of things. Money can help those things, but money is not one of those things. So it can be a tool, but it's not going to be the actual thing that makes you happy.
Perfect. It can be a tool. So write it down, people. It can be a tool, but it's not going to make you actually the happiest person on earth. Perfect. Well, actually, you said, and shifting a little bit, you said that Warren Buffett's success with investment is linked to the fact that he was a good investor for a tender age. Do you believe that the notion of success and the way you approach investment as an adult derives from your experience with money as a child as well? And you mentioned that you realized that there was money from 18 or 20, but do you think there's like a relationship in the way that you approach money?
Well, I remember one time, the very first investment I made, it was in a certificate of deposit, basically a savings account that was earning 1% interest. And I put $1,000 in it. I think I was maybe 18, something like that. Small amount of money earning 1% return. And I didn't really understand what interest was. I knew that I was supposed to do this. I was supposed to save money, but I didn't really get it. And I remember I woke up the next day and the account balance went from $1,000 to $1,000.03. I made 3 cents, 3 pennies of interest. I remember sitting there staring at it, being like, you paid me for doing nothing? I just went to sleep and I made money, even if it was 3 cents. And I think in that moment, I was like, I get it. Like this, you can just get paid for doing nothing. I think that will have a different impact on different people. But for me, it was like, oh, this is the ticket. If you can just get paid for existing, just for waking up, that was going to be the ticket to, you could see how that would scale into something much greater over time. So that was my early experience with it. And then that just kind of delved into the study of investing and whatnot. And it's always the case with investing that it doesn't necessarily matter that much what your returns are. If you earn big returns or small returns, it doesn't really matter that much. What matters are the returns that you earn for the longest period of time. So if you can earn just okay returns, just in a bank account even if you're just doing it in a bank account, savings account. If you can earn those returns for 50 years and hold on to it for a long period of time, the results can be amazing. And most people's attention, particularly in the stock market, is focused on how can I earn higher returns? How can I earn, like, what stocks are going to go up this month and this year? That's where the attention is. And most of the money is actually made on people who earn just okay returns, but do it for their entire lives. So the longer you can do it, the better you're always going to do.
Perfect. And I love this idea because people, they're not willing to make their first investment because they are afraid of losing money. And this is something that I hear a lot here in Brazil. Oh, I'm not going to go to the stock market, or I'm not going to do like a more sophisticated kind of investment because I am afraid to risk it all and lose it. But you know what? We are often making every day we are making choices and we are losing money. Like when you buy something that you're not going to use, or when you're buying something just to show off to people. And I think that people do not realize that what makes you like a very good investor is like doing it with discipline regularly and just waiting. Because there's no such thing as high returns in a short period of time. Right. This kind of magic,
I think what's also true in the stock market too is that the volatility, which people will say, oh, I lost money this month or this year, whatever it might be, that's actually why you do well over time. Mm-hmm. If you are willing to put up with that and you're willing to endure that pain, that's why the market goes up over time. That's the cost of admission you have to be willing to pay to deal with it. So the reason, it's not very intuitive to some people, but the reason that you will do well over the next 10 years in the stock market is because it's so uncomfortable and volatile this year and over the next couple of years. That's why you do well over time. That's why you can earn higher returns in something else that might seem safer.
You know what? When you were talking about this, being like able to deal with the volatility, there's like one number that I often like to say and talk about it, that we women in the Brazilian stock market represent about 25% of the investors. Mm-hmm. But our ticket, when we got into the stock market, it's like 3 times the average of a man investing. And we often buy and hold, whereas men, they try to trade all the time
Right.
because they get uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So for a woman to do her first investment, what we try to do, we try to study and get ready and know what we're going to face. When typically a man, they are kind of
I mean, it's
reckless.
similar all over the world.
Really?
That this is how it's. I think. I mean, there are lots of women investors who make mistakes, lots of men investors who do it right. But I think on average, men are much more likely to say, I'm really smart and I'm going to use my intelligence to try to outsmart the market. I'm just going to keep making different decisions and whatnot rather than just holding tight as long as I can. I think it takes a certain amount of humility to just say, I'm going to buy these stocks and hold them for as long as I possibly can. It takes a certain amount of humility to say, I don't know which ones are going to go up this year. I don't know what's going to happen over the next 5 years even. Some of these stocks that I buy might not do well over the next 10 years. You have to be very humble to say that and to admit that. And if you don't have that amount of humility, it's much more tempting to always be trying to trade as much as you can, in and out, in and out.
It's because people like to brag a lot. You often say as well that people like to brag and talk about the things, and they kind of underestimate the luck factor in everything that goes through their life. Can you talk a little bit more about this?
Well, it's always the case, whether it's in sports or fishing or stock market, that people talk about their wins and very rarely their losses over time. So that's always the case. Social media makes this much more difficult because now you have, particularly for young, like teenage investors, so many people on TikTok showing you, here's how much money I made trading options. Sometimes it's accurate, sometimes it's completely made up, but almost always they're only showing you the wins and never the losses. And it gives you a fake view of what investing is. This was really true in the United States around 2021, 2022. We had a huge explosion in new investors, teenage investors in the stock market on apps like Robinhood and whatnot. And I think a lot of people had had bad expectations of what they should be able to do because they saw people on Robinhood and on TikTok saying, oh, you can double your money every month. And that set their expectations of what they were likely to earn over time. And so it's always a false view of what you can see over time. If you sit down young people in the United States and you say, look, over time, if in the stock market, you can earn probably 7 to maybe 10% per year on average. They will roll their eyes at you. And they say 10% a year. I'm looking for 50. I'm looking for 300% per year. That's what they want. So a complete misalignment of expectations of what they're likely to earn over time because of what they see on social media and whatnot. But I think the magic in it is if you also sit them down and say, if you can earn 10% per year over the next 30 years, you know what that turns into? It can make you legitimately rich over time. That's a different argument, but it's harder for them to wrap their heads around.
Exactly, but I do think that the social media has this impact in all fields of life. So I think that our role as parents, as like people in the stock market, is to educate people so they can understand. It's not an easy job, but I think that we're trying to do our best. Right?
We're trying. We're doing the best, but we're right. And even when I was a kid, it was so different because we compared ourselves to our neighbors and our friends at school, and that was about it. And now on social media, you compare yourself to everybody all over the entire world. And when I was comparing myself to my neighbors when I was a child, I saw their good days and their bad days. I saw them argue. I saw them fight. I saw them cry. Whereas social media, you only see the good side of people.
That's right.
People put this polished fake view of how good they are, how much money they've made, or how happy they are. That can really misalign your expectations.
You're so right. And I do think that we have the mentality of one-upper. Like we're always chasing something, like one day after the other, and without realizing that we have ups and downs. So you're so right, so right.
And you see this, I'm sure it's true in most parts of the world, teenage anxiety, depression, and suicide, those rates have exploded over the last 20 years because, and at least part of it, maybe it's not 100%, but is who we compare ourselves to. It's much harder. It's easier than ever to do well in today's world. And it is harder than ever to feel like you are doing well. So even if we are earning more money than our parents and the stock market is higher and the economy is stronger than it was 30 years ago, you can feel like you're doing worse off because you're comparing yourself to a fake view of everybody else's life.
That's so right. That's so right. Oh my God. Let's shift a little bit and talk a little about bet and gambling. Here in Brazil, the platforms of betting, they They became legal like 2 years ago, but they exploded this year.
Yeah.
So you have lots of conflict of interest. So you have these platforms sponsoring soccer teams, and they are making ads everywhere, and the money that they put into ads is like huge. It's amazing. It's like, I don't know, I would say like 100 times larger than I have for 1 year is what they put in 1 month.
Yeah.
So it's a fight that's like, it's worth fighting, but I don't think we're going to win just trying to advertising and talking to people about the very fundamental thing that bet and gambling,
Yeah.
it's not investing. How do you see the scenario in the United States, and what kind of advice would you give to people who think that bet and gambling is investing?
Well, we have the same thing. You know, we legalized sports gambling just a couple of years ago. It's exploded. It is massive in the United States. And there's talk about like, did we go too far? Should we make it illegal again and ban it? I've always been of the view that you can't regulate what these people are going to do. It's always been the case that people are going to want to do what look like dumb things with their money, but it actually makes sense for them in the moment. I think most of these people, if they weren't betting on a sports game, they weren't betting on a football game, whatever it might be, they would be buying lottery tickets. They would be doing something else. They would find a different way. And I also think we should recognize that some people get a lot of joy out of doing it. It is unquestionable that some people will ruin their lives gambling, ruin their marriages, go way too far. They're addicted to gambling. The majority of people, though, I think genuinely enjoy it. And they know they're going to lose some money and whatnot, and they have fun doing it. So when that's the case, if you enjoy doing it and it makes sense to you, then maybe it makes sense to that other person. And I think it can be hard for someone like me or you or anybody else to say, oh, you guys are making very dumb decisions. Well, it might make sense to them. And if I was in their situation and I didn't feel like I had the chance or the hope to earn more money at work or to invest in the long run, then maybe betting on a sports game or buying a lottery ticket would give me my only sense of like hope for the future. And it would make me feel good in that day. And then, so maybe if I look at it and say, that's not the best thing for you to do, you should be investing, you should be doing this, maybe it makes perfect sense for that person. So but you have to mix that with the idea that, of course, there are compulsive gamblers who are going to go bankrupt. Mm-hmm. And there always have been. And whether it's in Las Vegas or in lottery tickets or whatnot, that's always been the case. And I think always will be. Very hard to regulate it.
Yes, but like most of these people, like they're really poor, they're like in the middle class or like in the poor class. Why do you think that they do that? Why do they gamble? Why do you think that they are doing that?
Daniel Kahneman, who's a great psychologist, he once made this point that when you feel like you don't have any options, you become very risk-taking. So if you feel like you have lots of options in front of you, I can invest in a bank account or bonds or stocks, then you might take a lower risk option. But when you feel like you're backed in a corner in life and you have no other options in front of you, you're going to take the riskiest option that you possibly can. So the data would definitely show that the people who are most likely to bet on sports and lottery tickets and gamble like that are people in the most precarious financial position. They're the ones who can least afford it. But that's always the case psychologically, that when you feel like you're backed in a corner, you're willing to take the biggest swing to try to get out of that extreme situation that you're in. I think that's just a fundamental part of psychology, even if it's easy and tempting for people like us to look at that and say, no, like, please don't do that. You should save for the future. It's always been the case that is people's standard psychology. The fewer options that you have, the bigger the risk you're willing to take.
You know, this idea that you propose in your podcast and probably in your books as well, like it changed the way that I see people. I have to tell you that because I often put myself in this position of not judging, but thinking, wow, this person should be doing like things differently. They should be trying things in another way. But once you put the context thing in the equation, it changed the way that I saw things.
Yeah. Because there might be other people who you are looking at and saying, well, you should do something different, who might be looking at you and saying you should be doing, or me. Exactly. It's the same. It's always the case that other people's decisions can look wrong if you don't understand their point of view. And it's great that I'm an American, you're Brazilian, because all over the world, I notice this with my books, I get comments from people in India and China and Brazil who will say, Morgan, what you wrote might be true in the United States, but it's not true in my culture. And I have to accept that. That's the case. Of course, I write it through the lens of an American because that's the world that I see. But so it's hard to understand why people do what they do until you understand the culture that they live in and the individual circumstances that they have in life.
Perfect. There's another example that got my attention. That is like the people who raise from classes when they are playing. So a sports player, when they are from like a community or a very poor part of the town, and then out of the blue they become like this huge guy in sports scenery. And actually, they are not making the money for themselves, but for the whole group, for the whole family. And it's another thing that's not pretty intuitive for me. But would you mind telling us a little bit more about this?
Yeah, we have a big problem in the United States with pro athletes, basketball, football, basketball. A lot of them, they make millions and millions of dollars, and a lot of them go bankrupt once their career is over. And how can you look at this, someone who's 25 years old, making $10 million a year, and they blow it all. They're broke. They go bankrupt. And it's so easy to criticize them. How could you be so stupid? You had that much money. And what happens to a lot of them, not all of them, is the reason they go bankrupt is not because they bought themselves a mansion or themselves a Rolls Royce. It's because they felt this obligation to buy every one of their family members a house and a car, to take care of their whole community, their neighbor, their barber, their pharmacist, their teachers. They felt an obligation to go buy them a house too. Because if you grow up in poverty, and then when you're 20 years old, you're making $10 million a year, you can't just look at everyone else in your family and say, good luck to you. I got my money. I'm going to go live a good life. Best of luck to all of you. And so I term this phrase social debt, which is the more money that you have, there's a little bit of social debt that comes along with it that changes other people's view of you, changes your own expectations, changes people's expectations that you will spend money on them. And it's very easy to overlook that. You know exactly how much money you're making, what your salary is, but it's very hard. It's very easy to overlook how much social debt comes with that and how other people's view of you and their expectations of you is going to change.
Well, definitely. Well, I do host a podcast called What's in Your Wallet, which is like an intended pun to what people ask women, what's in your purse. Yeah. So the pun is what's in your wallet rather than what's in your purse. And once I had the chance to interview a Black journalist, which states exactly what you mentioned. She had a social debt to her community. And for her, it's really, really hard to spend money. And this is another thing that you mentioned a lot, that for some people who have been saving all their lives, it's really hard to spend money after a while. Why did that happen?
I think for a lot of people, it becomes part of their identity that they are a person who saves money. And then even if they have saved more than enough money that they'll ever need, and they're now retired, they should start spending it down. They can't do it because they've become so used to seeing the numbers go up every single month, and living below their means is part of their identity. Now, that is a good problem to have. Like, you've saved so much money and now you have so much money, you don't know what to do with it. Good problem to have, right? But for a lot of people at that point, money is controlling you. Like, you might have a happier life if you could spend it, but you can't. You can't bring yourself to do it. And at that point, it's not really an asset. It's like a psychological liability. It's psychological debt because you have money and you're too scared to spend it. And so I think that happens to quite a few people, in particularly in wealthier countries. And for people who grew up poor and then become wealthy, one of two things usually happens. Either they can't spend it fast enough. They go out and spend it as fast as they possibly can, or they never spend it. They're never able to spend it. Both of those can be just as damaging psychologically for people. And I think it's a good problem to have, but people who made a lot of money and cannot spend it. And a lot of those people are not very happy with their life because I think money is controlling them. Rather than using money as a tool to be happier and live a better life, the money is in control of their own identity.
And is there a magic formula
No.
to get out of it?
No, not whatsoever. So I think people have to be very careful making sure that money does not become part of your identity, that earning money is not part of your identity, that saving, that spending is not it, that you are always in control over the money rather than it becoming control over you. And that can creep into your life very subtly without you knowing it very much. And I think this has probably happened to me as well, where saving and investing becomes so much of who you are that you can't let go of it. And it's going to control who you are. So rather than using money as a tool, it's using you. And that's a tough problem to have.
It is, definitely it is. So before going to investment, let's talk a little bit and close the idea of spending. How should people be spending right now?
I think it's different for everyone. And you can't call it a science because there's no formula. And what works for me might not work for you. And so everybody's different. They have to figure it out for themselves. I think the question you want to ask yourself, though, is what hole am I trying to fill in this? And now some holes are good and some holes are bad. Some holes are I'm bored and I want to be entertained. Some holes are I want to understand how the world works and do some travel and see other things. I want to be comfortable. I want to be happy. I want to laugh. Those are all things. But for a lot of people, the hole they're trying to fill with their spending is I need more attention from other people. I'm depressed. I want this person's attention. I want people to admire me. I want my friends and family to like me more. And their desire to spend is filling that. And not only will spending not fill those holes, but that's like a completely different issue that needs to be attached, or that needs to be attacked separately. And so I think from the highest level, that's what it should be. I think the spending that makes most people happy is when you are using it as a tool to make connections with other people. And it's very cliche to say spend it on experiences. I think that's overdone. I think really what it can be is experiences with other people. So I've noticed this, that if I am playing Legos with my kids on the floor at home, I'm on my living room floor playing Legos, that's amazing. That's so much fun. And if I go on a fancy vacation with my kids and I'm building sandcastles on the beach, that's really great too, but it's not that much better than playing Legos with them on the floor. If going to like an expensive vacation and building sandcastles with them, if that's a 10, playing Legos at home is like an 8 or a 9. It's pretty close because what I actually enjoy is spending time with my kids. And so the idea that I need to spend a lot of money to do that, like I can spend money. I do enjoy the vacation because it's uninterrupted time with them. But what I really enjoy is uninterrupted time with my kids. That's what's making me happy. And so a lot of people, like, will the big fancy house make you happier? The answer might be yes. But the reason the answer is yes is because it makes it easier to spend time with your friends and family at that big house. And that's what's actually making you happy. And if you were there alone by yourself without any friends and no family to love you, would you actually be happy in that big house? Probably not.
Probably not. Wow. Wow, that's a lot to think about. Because we are always chasing and not recognizing what is behind the wishes that we have. And for me, it works the same way as you mentioned before. I have 2 kids, and like what lacks for me is time to be with them. So whenever I have the time to be with them is the best time ever. And there's no money which can buy this experience of being with them. And I might have everything, but if they are not with me, it's not worth it.
Doesn't matter. I've always framed it as, which of these would you rather be? You make $1 million a year, but your kids don't like you. Your marriage isn't any good. Your friends don't like you. Everyone you're not well liked by your community. You're not in good health. Or you make $100,000 per year and you have a great relationship. Your kids adore you. You have tons of friends who like you and like spending time. It's obvious which one of those you should want to be. But the irony is that the draw for so many people is a singular focus on how can I make more money without recognizing that that is at best a tool to getting those other things, friends, family, health, that kind of thing.
Perfect. I love it. That's great. Well, shifting a little bit now to investment, because investment may give you everything that you need for you to have your family and friends around you. So in your first book, The Psychology of Money, it starts with a basic premise that financial success has more to do with behaviors than number. And so how did you get to this conclusion, and what did you say about behavior?
I think it was watching so many investors over the years and watching how many very smart, very educated, very experienced investors do very poorly. And then at the same hand, watching people who had no education, no experience, just ordinary folks do very well. And there's no other field that is like that. There's no other field where somebody with no education and no experience can do better than the person who has the best education, the best experience. It doesn't happen in any other field.
That's right.
And I think the reason that is because doing well with money is not about what you know. It's not about how smart you are. It's not about where you went to school. It's just about how you behave. It's just, can you manage greed and fear? Can you take a long-term mindset? Like how gullible are you? Who do you trust to get your information from? That's all that matters in something like investing. And how smart you are, what your IQ is, whether or not you went to Harvard Business School makes no difference whatsoever. And you can even take this to a more extreme end and say some of the people who are very educated use that intelligence to try to twist the knobs and fiddle the levers, ended up doing worse than the person who has enough humility to just say, I'm just going to invest every month and leave it alone for my entire life. And that's all I'm going to do. that person's likely to do very well. And some of the people who have the best education, the hedge fund managers, are the ones who are most likely to blow themselves up and earn very poor returns over time. And so that's where the idea of behavior came in.
That's so great. And I love that you write in your books about people, the narratives of their lives, rather than trying to put an algorithm or how we're going to get rich and things like that. And there's a story in one of your books that tells a situation about a party where like there was like a very wealthy person who was an investor with a writer. And he was telling and trying to brag that he was making more money than the writer.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And it's like he was making more money in one day than this author all his life. And then the writer replied that unlike the investor, he had what the investor would never have. That's enough.
Enough money.
Yes, exactly. And you have also said that you do not see yourself as a rich person, but just live with enough. What does having enough money means to you?
I think it's different for everybody. And I think what's important is to note that having enough does not mean that you don't want more. I think that I have some version of enough money, but I also want more. I'm going to keep working. I hope my books keep selling. I want more too. So it doesn't mean that you reach a point where you say, I don't want any more money anymore. That's not the point. Because if people think that's the point, then it doesn't make any sense. I think what it means is that you need to put as much emphasis on controlling your expectations as you do trying to improve your circumstances. As much effort as you put into earning more money and investing more money, you need to put that much effort into keeping your expectations properly grounded and appreciating what you have today. Because if you don't, it's never going to feel like it's enough. No matter how much money you make, no matter how much raises you get or how much you earn in the stock market, it will never feel like it's enough. And for a lot of those people, when it doesn't feel like it's enough, they keep on taking more risk and more risk and more risk until it backfires. Or in their careers, they work longer hours and longer hours and longer hours with more ambition until they realize that their kids don't know them, that they've spent too much time away from them. So if you don't go out of your way to try to temper those expectations, it's not going to feel like it's enough. And I guess the realization is what's actually going to make you happy is the gap between how much money you make and where your expectations are. It's the gap between the two that is going to make you happy. So if you're making a lot of money, but you have high expectations, there's no gap. And those people don't feel like they're doing very well at all. And you can flip that around and say there's some people who don't make that much money, but their expectations are so low that there's a huge gap in between there. And they wake up every morning super happy.
That's right. So Morgan, we know that there's no set formula for financial success and that one cannot assume that what works for me will work for you. So you mentioned in one of your podcasts that each person plays their own game when it comes with dealing with money, and we have to reckon which game we are playing. But can you see any trait that people who are good investors share in common? Is there anything that is like a common ground for good investors?
I think in life and doing well with money, not specifically to investing, but doing well with money, I think there can actually be a very simple formula. And it's different for everybody. Everyone will have a different version of what this formula leads to. But I think the very simple formula is independence plus purpose. So if you're using your money to gain independence, to do what you want, when you want, with whom you want, and then you have some purpose in your life that you are working towards that actually makes you happy, those are the two things that you can use money for in your investing, in your career, to actually give yourself a better life. My version of that formula will be a little bit different from yours. My definition of independence and purpose will be different from yours. Everyone has to figure it out for themselves. But I think at the highest level, that's what tends to make people happy. They are independent to live their own lives, and they have some purpose that they are chasing to make them happier.
That's great. There's one like a billionaire here in Brazil, which is like a great constructor. So he's like one of the, I think he's the biggest billionaire in Brazil. And what he says that his purpose in life is to give back. So he's giving like 60% of his fortune to the others. So he thinks that he's accomplishing his mission in life. And he says that it's really, really hard to make people do the same. Of course, because everyone have their purpose in life, and it's different from me and from you.
Yes.
But in the end of the day, has everything to do with independency and purpose.
I love it.
I love it. Great. Well, you are a person who holds financial success as a long-term achievement and warns about people about lucrative opportunities that promise big money over a short period of time. What tips would you give individual investors to avoid falling into scams or making dangerous choices when trying to grab an opportunity?
There's no such thing as a great, excellent return that doesn't come with higher risk. That's always the case. Always keeping that in mind. The better it looks, the higher risk it's going to be. There are so few exceptions to that rule that you should just assume that it's always the case. That if someone is promising you a huge return, there's a huge risk embedded in that. That's always the case. And that can actually be a pretty positive thing to think about when you think that what you need to do well over time is not to earn high returns. It's to just stick around for as long as you can, to be an investor for the next 10 or 20 or 30 years. And if you can just earn okay returns, just decent returns for 30 years, you will do amazing. You'll build all the wealth that you need. And therefore, the super fancy, high, exciting returns that you might see that almost certainly have more risk in them are things that you don't even need. You do not need to earn high returns this year. You can just earn pretty good returns for the next 10 or 20 or 30 years, and that will get you everything that you need.
That's it. You just have to sit and wait. As you mentioned earlier in our podcast, just sit and wait. Perfect.
So simple.
It's simple to say, but it's hard to do.
Yes, and not everyone will be able to do it, which is why it can be so lucrative for those who can do it. I don't think we're ever going to live in a world where anybody in any country, where everybody is making good financial decisions. It will never be the case because it's not something that you can learn like on a spreadsheet. And so we know things about how physics works today that we did not 100 years ago, that everybody knows today. But it's never going to be like that with money. It's never going to be the case that everyone does well all the time because it's behavioral and people will be making bad decisions 100 years from now, just as they were 100 years ago. And so I think part of that window, using finance as a window to how people think and behave, is what's always been so interesting to me. To watch how people deal with greed and fear and risk and uncertainty. It's the same today as it was 100 years ago and will be 100 years from now.
No. And there's another thing that you mentioned that won't change, that the biggest decision that you have in life is who, if, when, and with who you're going to get married.
That's it.
And why is that?
Well, you'll spend a lot of time with them. You better enjoy it. And so that's really what it is. And I think for a lot of this too, if you're going to make some investing analogy to this, which is maybe a silly thing to do, but people change over time and grow over time and change and grow into something different over time. And it's always a question of just, can you grow and adapt together? And a lot of people, it's just moving apart. So it's a completely different topic, but nothing's going to make much more of a difference in your life than whether, when, and whom to marry. If not whether and when to have children as well. Those two things move the needle more than anything.
I swear to you, I thought that you were mentioned like who you're going to get married because it's easier for you to be wealthy if you're with someone. Well, especially if this person thinks just like you. When spending and investing money. And that's what I thought about.
Right. I like it.
And what we learn as well is like what's going to make you like poor is going to, when you go through a divorce, and it's really hard for people when they go through a divorce because they're going through an emotional phase and they're like splitting everything that they built in life and their expenditures go like to the roof. And that's what I thought.
There's a financial advisor who I really admire. He says, "You want the best financial advice you could ever give? Stay married. That's the best." Now that's not marriage advice. That's financial advice. But it's true. It's very difficult to do well over time if you're splitting everything by two.
Exactly. Especially if you have kids. Well, let's talk a little bit about the collaborative fund. You became a partner of the collaborative fund in 2016. What challenge did you face in making the transition from writing to become an entrepreneur and the leader of a company?
Well, I've always been a writer, and that's what I do at the collaborative fund as well. And so for me, it was actually, where was the home for my writing going to be? Was it going to be at a big media organization like the Wall Street Journal or Bloomberg? Or did I want to have more of an independent voice and someplace that would let me write anything that I wanted whenever I wanted? And that was mainly why I joined the collaborative fund. And so that's what's been really appealing to me as a writer, is just being able to have the independence in writing to say anything that I want. But it's also been very interesting working and being a partner at a venture capital firm to see that up close and firsthand. And what you really see and gain an appreciation for is how difficult business is, particularly at the early stages of like that, the challenges that they go through, the uncertainty that they go through. And that's why business can be so lucrative, is because it's so hard. The people who figure it out, the rewards are great for those who figure it out, because figuring it out is very, very difficult. And it's also the case that you see a lot of entrepreneurs early on who are filled with confidence of where this is going to go. And that's great. That's the trait that they should have. and then they face the reality of how difficult it's going to be for everybody. Talking to a friend earlier today about how incredible Facebook was as a product because it worked from the very day that they started. When Mark Zuckerberg started Facebook in 2004, within 2 weeks, 50% of the students at Harvard were using Facebook. It took
Wow.
2 weeks for half the school to be using it.
Wow.
And so it just worked from day one. And that is so rare. Most businesses, virtually every business, when you start it, it's just a nonstop series of problems and challenges to overcome. So it gives you more respect and empathy for CEOs and founders going through it.
Exactly. And I think that in the Facebook case, the adaptation that they've made along the way, the business that they bought, they took like huge risks
Yeah.
shifting the business. So I think that also counts when you are trying to develop a business.
Oh, it's an amazing success story. That is a once in a century kind of story to witness.
Exactly. Perfect. So before you close this interview, there's one gift I would like to give to you. Since you're talking about investments and being an investor, here in Brazil, we used to have a trading at the floor before putting everything to electronic trading. And we used to use jackets to design and to show that we were traders. So we made sure that we had one for you and specially done for you. So I hope you like it, and I hope you wear whenever you're thinking about investing.
Well, thank you. I love it. We use these at the New York Stock Exchange as well, and I love this. I'm going to put this on my wall. Is that okay?
That's
I can have it
great.
on
Yes,
my wall in my
please.
office. I love
Yes,
it.
please.
Because I won't wear it around town. That would be kind of silly.
It
But
would be kind of weird.
it would be a little bit weird. But this will be great on my wall. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And before we close it, you mentioned that people do not remember the whole books that they read or the podcast that they listen to or the films that they watched, but they rather remember ideas and things
Yeah.
and phrases. So if by any chance you would like and you had the power to make people remember one thing from our conversation, what would it be?
You have to know yourself. You have to figure out your own personality, your own risks, your own ambitions, your own social aspirations, and recognize that yours are going to be different from other people's. And once you view it through that lens, I think a lot of money problems come into a more reasonable light. You can figure out how to use money as a tool to make you happy rather than trying to figure out like it's a math problem to solve that's going to work for everybody else.
Wow, that's a great advice. Thank you so much, Morgan. It's been a pleasure and an honor to be here with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Thank you.